Hey, good morning. Let me turn off the music audio. Hey, good morning, India. Good afternoon in England and Europe, and good evening in California, and sleepy time in East Coast. Welcome you all. This is MedBix webcast, healthcare media channel. My name is Ramana Anamraju, host of this webcast. We have a very special program today. We have a special guest. Uh, she's going to join in a few minutes. Following her interview, then I'm going to talk uh, about a famous scientist and a mathematician. Um, Really, our guest, the chief guest speaker, would have helped her if she would have been there at another birth during the time in 1700. So she died with a pulmonary embolism because of the late pregnancy. So this doctor would have saved her. But there is a guest host joining me from Chicago, Jasmine Jackson. I met her teacher. I know her teacher, professor. Uh, that she one day she wrote a column, and I was so impressed. And she was writing passionately about women's issues and all those things. I thought a guy asking questions, then a woman with going through the same pain, she would have been a good one to ask questions. But anyway, I'm going to introduce Dr. Sophia Yan. She is graduated from MIT. Uh, uh, can you hear Sophia?
Yes.
Sophia, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. So that problem with the um, um, she has some problem. I think uh, Jasmine, you got to figure it out. You have to increase the speaker volume. Um, but anyway, I hope I asked. But let me continue. Jasmine Jackson is from Chicago. She is my friend's as a professor there, and she's a student there. She was writing a lot of passionate issues about that, and then. Now, let me introduce Dr. Sophia Yan. She's from. I hope I'm saying right the pronunciation, the name. But she's from MIT. She did a biology in MIT. All the engineers home. Then she did a medical school in California. The rest of the schools are in California and residency in Oakland. And then she has a master's in public health, and she was passionate about a lot of issues, women's issues from get-go. She started an organization called sheheroes.com, and is about the women's the girls and young women can achieve anything they want. Oh my god.
We can hear you,
Sophia,
Ramana.
you can
We
hear me, right?
Yeah, it's Jasmine. Jasmine's having issues.
So yeah, this is a problem with always the case.
Mhm.
um but the technical issues, I've been challenging this for almost for 6 months. Always one or the other way, always is challenging. But anyway, Dr. Sophia has a master's in public health, and she is the founder of sheheroes.com. Is a nonprofit organization that helps women. um, uh, the second one is that she's started a startup. When I met her in California, during my stay in California, I met her there in she was starting the Pandya Health, a startup company to alternative for the woman to seek help in birth control and other issues, women's issues. So without further delay, let me introduce you, Dr. Sophia Ann. I'm honored to have you. Welcome, Dr. Sophia. Let me bring her to the table. Yes, Dr. Sophia, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm here to go over contraceptives briefly, give you some updates on the latest and greatest, and then talk about periods optional. And before we start, I just want to throw a pitch out for plancpills.org. Given the reversal of Roe v. Wade in this country, it's really important that people know what are their options. So if you have any questions about medication abortion, please go to plancpills.org. Nonprofit has a legal hotline, a medical hotline, as well as telemedicine options if you need to avail yourself of those services. So, Romana, if you could throw
Yeah.
up the slides, that'd be great.
Okay. So let me.
And thank you, everybody, for joining. Great to see Pam. Great to see Dr. Nim Eilbeck. She's one of the doctors here at Pandia Health. So this is just showing you in the bottom right corner that the uterus is more happy if you make hashtag periods optional. We'll hit that later. And then in the bottom left is Pandia Health. We are the only women-founded, women-led birth control delivery company.
Just a minute. Give me one
Yep.
second.
Romana, if you can go to the next slide when you're ready.
Okay, 1 second.
And actually, you can skip that slide and go to the slide after that as well.
You want me to go to the next slide? Okay.
Yes. And so this is just Pandia Health, PANDIA health.com. Check us out. We are the only women-founded, women-led, the only doctor-led company in birth control delivery in the United States. Next slide. So this is the slide that I think will shock, if you could go back one, many of you. I don't think people realize that the implant, the 3-year implant that you stick in your arm that releases hormone, where 30% of women lose their periods and they're like, yes, and 70% have lighter periods, beats vasectomy. So that's amazing. Then comes the IUD with hormone, and the IUD with hormone beats tubal ligation. Tubal ligation, for those of us with uteri, they go into you, they snip out an inch of your tubes on each side, and then they burn or tie them. And you can still get pregnant on that method, but the IUD vasectomy and implant beats tubal ligation. Tubal ligation beats the IUD that's with copper. And I know a lot of women are like, ooh, copper, no hormones. But it's really important for you all to know the side effects of the copper IUD, which is oftentimes more blood, more cramps. Because I answer stuff on Reddit as well as Quora, and women are always like, I have a copper IUD, so much blood, so much cramps. And I was like, did nobody tell you those are the 2 greatest side effects? And probably your physician told you, and you were just like, yeah, you tell me lots of side effects, whatever. But this is legit. More blood, more cramps. So if you're the type of person who's like, oh, is that blood leaking down my leg? Yes, copper IUD for you. But if you're the person like me who feels every single cramp, maybe not so much, because more cramps, more blood. But anything is better than pregnant. Then comes the shot. Unfortunately, for the skinnier women, it's not good for your bones. For the heavier women, it gives you the munchies. But again, being pregnant, the growing embryo eats all of your calcium, and you certainly will gain weight when you're pregnant. So better the shot than pregnant if that's a method that's best for you to prevent unplanned pregnancy. Then comes the ring. And I think what a lot of people don't know is there is a 1-year ring. And although it says put it up for 3 weeks, take it out for 1, that's just like a lot of hassle. You can just personally put the ring into your vagina. It doesn't matter how it goes, what orientation, it delivers the medication. It just sits there for a year. You don't have to have a period or an artificial withdrawal bleed at all. So that's Anovera. But we don't recommend it unless you're 30 years of age or older, because it doesn't have enough estrogen. And during age 15 to 30 to 35, you're building on your bones, and that's all you get for the rest of your life. And if you don't have enough estrogen, then you're not building up those bones. So at Pandia Health, expert care by expert doctors, we do not recommend Anovera until you're 30 years old. But if you're 30 and above, great option. There's the Nuva ring, and that's just one that you could change monthly, and you could either leave it in for 3 weeks, take it out for 1 week, have a withdrawal bleed, or as I mentioned before, that withdrawal bleed is totally arbitrary, so you could just leave it in, and the Nuva ring actually has 35 days worth of medication in every ring. There's no month that's greater than 35 days, so you could just change it once a month. And then comes the patch. You have to change it every single week. 52 times you could mess up. The pill, 365 times you could mess up. but know that there are 40 different pills and at the very least 8 different progesterones. So if you don't like one progesterone, make sure you know the name of it and ideally the dose, and then tell your doctor, I don't like this one. And there are 7 other progesterones that you can try. And then comes condoms with spermicide, withdrawal, fertility awareness methods, and abstinence is all or nothing. If you can pull it off, 100%. If you can't pull it off, then you're pregnant. And they've shown people that take abstinence pledges are actually more likely to get sexually transmitted infections because they don't have condoms when they do initiate sex, and it only delays initiation of sex by a couple of months. Next slide. So new methods. There is a new patch. A lot of physicians were anti-patch because the original patch, the Ortho Evra and Xulane, it's generic, we see as equivalent to a 50 microgram pill. And if it's too much estrogen, then you risk blood clots. Too little estrogen, bad for your bones. But 50 micrograms of estrogen is a lot of estrogen. So we generally do not recommend the Xulane or Ortho Evra patch unless you have another drug that's causing your liver to rev up and eat all the estrogen. Otherwise, you risk blood clots. So they specifically developed this new patch, levonorgestrel, ethinyl estradiol. The key is it has 30 micrograms of estrogen in it. And as we'll show in the next slide, it has much less estrogen to worry about. However, it's not for people who have a body mass index of 30 or greater because it has reduced effectiveness as well as a higher blood clot risk. But it's called Twerla, and if your BMI is less than 30, then it's fine. It is pricey because it's new, it's brand name. However, if you're in the United States and under the Affordable Care Act, if you have insurance and your employer is not religious like Hobby Lobby or a Jesuit college, then it should be available for free. No copay, no deductible, as long as your doctor writes for it. Any FDA-approved method of birth control, if you have insurance under the Affordable Care Act, is free, no copay, no deductible. Next slide. So this is just showing you the graph because, as a geek, I like to share graphs. If you look at that big area under the curve, that's the original patch, Xulane, Ortho Evra. So there's a lot of exposure to estrogen and therefore a greater risk of clot. If you see the peak and down, peak and down, peak and down, that's what happens with your standard 35 microgram estrogen patch. So although the peak is up there, the overall area under the curve, which is what you're exposed to estrogen and your risk of clot, is low. And then the second lower curve is the new patch that was designed to be the same as a pill. And you can see the area is roughly the same. So the risk of the new patch, Twerla, is the same as the risk of birth control pill. That's about 35 micrograms or maybe even less. Next slide. So I mentioned the 1-year vaginal ring. When I first heard about it, I was really excited. I was like, we don't need IUDs, or those people who don't know how to do IUDs, we can give everybody the vaginal ring. But they're like, we have very low hormone. And I was like, wait, what'd you say? And they said 13 micrograms. And I was like, you mean 30, right? Because we need 30 for people that are under age 30. And they're like, no, it's 13 micrograms. And I was like, oh, no. So if you're 30 and above, awesome option. And there are, we have those of us with uteri have to still prevent unplanned pregnancy from age 30 to 50 and somewhere pop in children before, somewhere around there. So it's totally fine. It is very expensive because it's covering a year's supply, $2,500 a year. But again, under the Affordable Care Act, it should be no copay, no deductible in the United States. Next slide. And then clinical pearls. Number 1, look at your birth control pills. I like to do this with a bunch of women on a bunch of pills. They'll pull out their pill and I'm like, does your birth control have the word tri, T-R-I in it? Because that means it's triphasic. And they used to make it triphasic because they were trying to mimic the natural cycle, but it's so super physiologic that it's just a farce and it's really not necessary. So those of us in academia always go with the monophasic. And if you're on a triphasic, then your doctor doesn't know about this. So this is something you need to educate yourself, or you as a healthcare practitioner should know about. As I mentioned before, Stanford Pediatric Adolescent Gynecology, Stanford Adolescent Medicine, Stanford Pediatric Endocrinology does not recommend less than 30 micrograms of estrogen in your birth control pill until you're 30 years old. Once you're 30, you can do whatever you want because your bone is what it is, but under 30, no less than 30 micrograms. And then at Pandia Health, I've realized as a woman of color, most of medicine is based on a 70-kilo white man. Anybody who's in medicine will tell you that is our standard in medicine, the 70-kilo white man. And certainly not that for birth control. But what I was taught at UCSF and Stanford works great for a Caucasian female that wants to bleed every single month. But for Asians and Blacks, we found that they need more progestational activity to avoid the breakthrough bleeding. And the example I give is I was taught this drug at UCSF and Stanford, and I had to go through 3 different pills until I found one that didn't give me breakthrough bleeding. And over my 20 years of using the pill, I keep going back to the one that we were taught at UCSF because, like, it should be good. It's the one we're told. This is the one we're supposed to do. And I can take my pill every single day at the same day because it's been 20 years and I've been doing this, and I still get breakthrough bleeding. And so after studying birth control pills, I put them in a Excel spreadsheet, ranking them from least likely to have breakthrough bleeding, most likely to have breakthrough bleeding, least likely to have zits and munchies and acne and bad side effects to most, and found an optimal one where we find 85% of people do great on it versus 55% of people stay on the birth control at a year. So 45% quit. But our algorithm results in better results. And we're studying it to look as race for a proxy for genetics, but we hope in the future we can get their genetics via 23andMe or My History or whatever DNA sequencing, and we can see, oh, you got this is the best birth control pill for you. So next slide. I know that there's a lot of medical people watching this, so if you go to bit.ly /capital Pandia, capital Health, capital androgen, you can get my Excel spreadsheet. Now it's a Google sheet ranking from most androgenic to least androgenic, actually least androgenic to most androgenic, least progestational to most progestational, so that if you have side effects, how to manage them. And there's actually 2 links up there. I think it's different now, and it's based on work by Dr. Jalovsek on how to manage side effects. So if you've got depression, you should move this up and down. If you've got zits, you should move this up and down. If you have breakthrough bleeding, you should move this up and down. And this should help anybody who's writing birth control. Next slide. So top 3 reasons for people missing a pill. Number 1 is they forgot. Solution: have an alarm, have a birth control holder. There's actually a technical holder that has the 4 weeks by 7 pills. And if you pop it out, it keeps track. And if you don't pop it out, then it signals your phone until you do it. It's pretty cool. They were away from home, so I always prescribe an extra travel pack to have in my backpack, my purse, and my suitcase in case my suitcase gets lost, and at least my purse has it, So make sure that as a healthcare provider, never withhold birth control. We teach that to every physician. What happens when you withhold birth control? Somebody becomes pregnant that doesn't want to become pregnant, and you're dealing with an unwanted, unplanned pregnancy that results in an abortion or something else. And then they didn't have a new pack. So again, give out a year's supply at a time. Learned from opening Pandia Health from the pharmacy side as a doctor. I'm like, I wrote you dispense 1, refill times 12. What are you talking about? You have a year's supply. But I didn't realize by doing that, I have chained the patient to the pharmacy every single month. However, if I write dispense 13 packs or dispense 17 packs, the pharmacy can always constrict that. And they can't expand it, but they can constrict it if the insurance is evil and they won't pay for stuff. So please write a year's supply at a time in the United States. 20 states allow insurances to give out a year's supply, but I can tell you as a company that deals with insurance that many insurances are not following that law. And then lastly, didn't have it in their hands. That's the whole reason I started Pandia Health. No one runs out of birth control on our watch. We deliver it by mail, set it and forget it. Never run out of birth control on our watch. If your doctor writes it and you have insurance to cover it, you pay us nothing. Next page. Emergency contraception. Next slide. So these are the 4 methods of emergency contraception. And when I gave this talk a couple of years back to a bunch of Stanford doctors, only 1 out of the entire room knew about the second method, which is prescription emergency contraception. So any physician here, please take note. Prescription emergency contraception called Ella, and it beats Plan B and its generics at every single time point. It also works up to a BMI of 35. whereas Plan B and its generics at a BMI of 26 starts to have lower efficacy, and at a BMI of 30 is useless. So as a physician, you should know the stuff that you can prescribe. And then on the far left, for everybody to educate themselves, the number one most effective emergency contraception is the copper IUD. It's 99.99999% effective in preventing an unplanned pregnancy within 5 days of a contraceptive accident, sexual assault, condom popping, forgetting to take your pills 3 days in a row. Though it does require procedure, and as I mentioned, there's side effects to the copper IUD. They recently tested the levonorgestrel IUD, which you see below there, and it had a failure rate of, I think, 1 out of like 317, whereas the copper IUD had 0 pregnancies out of like a similar number. But it has fewer side effects, and who better to put in a long-acting reversible contraceptive than somebody who just had an oopsie, because they might have another oopsie. So then comes Ella. All of these methods you can use up to 5 days after contraceptive failure, just most effective on the left, least effective on the right, and then third most effective. So why would you ever use the third most effective if you could get your doctor to write you Ella in case of future need, like a fire extinguisher sitting in the corner? And again, if you have insurance in the United States under the Affordable Care Act, no copay, no deductible, aka free. And then lastly, you can take a bunch of birth control pills now, a bunch of birth control in 12 hours. Google it. You have to have a very specific type of pill, and it has to be a specific type of dose. But if you got nothing else, better that than pregnant. Next slide. Just again, Plan B and its generics don't work if your BMI is 26 or greater. So anybody with a uterus right now, please go look up BMI calculator, throw down your height, your weight, make sure your BMI is not 26 or greater, though 2/3 of the United States fits in that category. And if that's the case, you need Ella or an IUD. And if your BMI is greater than 35, your only option is one of the 2 IUDs. Next slide. So is menstruation obsolete? This is my passion as a person with a uterus, that you can make your periods hashtag optional. And Dr. Coutinho actually came up with this idea in 1999 with Dr. Shelley Segal, who was the inventor of Norplant, which was the 5 rod that used to go into your arm. Next slide. Great. So on the left here is the Dogon tribe. On the right here is the United States. The Dogon tribe is in Mali, Africa. They die at age 70 to 80, just like us. So we're comparing apples to apples, not apples to oranges. And they have 100 periods in their lives. So if you go to the second and the last line, 100 periods in their lives, we have 350 to 400 periods in our lives. So we have enough periods for 2 or 3 other women. And the reason why is they start their periods later, 16. We start our periods at 12 in the United States. Basically, 100 pounds or 22% body fat is when you hit menarche, and we hit that sooner in the United States. They have 7 periods a year. Again, nutrition, we have 13 periods a year. But more importantly, they have 8 or 9 children in their lives. We only have 2. They breastfeed for 12 months. We breastfeed for 0, 3, or 6 months. So they spend about 20 years of their lives pregnant or exclusively breastfeeding. How many periods do you have when you're pregnant? 0. How many periods do you have when you're exclusively breastfeeding? 0. And so it's more natural to be pregnant or breastfeeding, aka no periods, than this incessant menstruation that we're doing here in the more industrialized, more nutritionized countries. Next slide. So these are medical conditions that are better without bleeding every single month. And basically, every medical condition is better with a stable hormone than up and down, or with the birth control pill patch ring, 3 weeks up, 1 week down, 3 weeks up, 1 week down. Your body likes a stable hormone, particularly seizure disorders, diabetes, but also asthma, arthritis, depression, acne. If you have menstrual headaches and you only get them around your period, if we eliminate your period, no more headache. Next slide. And then the number one cause of missed school and work in the United States, but also other countries, is bad, evil periods under the age of 25. And I've seen, whenever I give a talk, even to a group of women CEOs, 10% will come up to me afterwards and be like, oh, my periods are so horrible. I don't know what to do. And I'm like, Do you not have health insurance? You are the CEO, but startups, we don't necessarily have health insurance, but a lot of us have health insurance. There are significant others. So if you are missing school and work, please see a doctor. And I know people like, it runs in my family. My mom has it, my aunt has it, grandma has it. Just because it runs in your family doesn't mean it has to be. And the example I give is my family is blind as a bat, but we all use contact lenses and glasses. We don't go around blind bumping into things, we take advantage of science and medicine. Same thing can apply to allergies. If I don't take my allergy meds, I go around going, I take my medicine so I can breathe and so I can function. If you're missing any amount of school or work, please see a doctor. And then academic competitiveness. I have to pitch from Asian, Tiger Mom, Silicon Valley. I have 2 daughters. Who's going to do better on the SAT? My daughters, who have a 0% chance of random blood hitting them on the day of SATs or finals, or your daughter, my daughters who won't have any chance of that, versus your daughters who have a 1 in 4 chance of bleeding on their finals or other things like that. Next slide. So it's really hard because we as physicians in healthcare are always like, you must bleed every single month. And yes, if you are 2 years after your first period in a first world country, we gave you enough nutrition, you should bleed every single month. However, once we know that that system's all good and it's working, then we have the technology to make hashtag periods optional. And actually, every time you build up that lining, you risk endometrial cancer. Every time you pop out an egg, we don't know if it's the popping or the healing, you risk ovarian cancer. The only way to decrease your risk of ovarian cancer is by going on the pill, the patch, the ring to turn off that egg popping every single month. If you do that for 5 years, it decreases your risk by 50%. And the only other way to decrease your risk of ovarian cancer is take out your ovaries. So every time you do this, every time you pop this, you risk endometrial ovarian cancer. And we're doing it 350 to 400 times when what is natural would be 100 times. Next slide. So let's make periods optional. If you want a rehash of that last part, it's my TEDx talk. So if you go to pandiahealth.com/periods optional, at the bottom is my TEDx talk. So I will open it up to questions from Jasmine, but I do see one question here. What does birth control usage look like to you in individuals with PCOS? I have friends with PCOS who are afraid of using BC pills because of the hormones and their mental health in the past. So for polycystic ovarian syndrome, the treatment is generally the birth control pill, patch, or ring. But you can also do just a progesterone only option if they notice that when they go on the pill, it affects their mental health. Each person is different, so each person has to try it. And each person has to figure out, is it the estrogen affecting their mental health or is it the progesterone? And oftentimes it's the progesterone. If it's a progesterone, as I mentioned, there's 8 different progesterones. So which one did you not like? And did you try the other 7? But if you just don't want to go there, you can get an IUD, which continuously gives you progesterone. It may not block the cysts that may form because sometimes there is ovulation with an IUD or an implant or a shot. The shot is probably the best one at blocking that, but I already told you about the side effects. It's, deciding that with your primary care provider. And then also for polycystic ovarian syndrome, you can treat it with progesterone for like 7 to 10 days, come off, and then have a bleed every quarter. So you could just do that. But I would say that's not optimal treatment. And then there's also metformin to treat the metabolic. So I would suggest metformin plus a birth control pill, patch, or ring, but not tolerating that IUD implant shot, not tolerating that, doing just the progesterone withdrawal. But definitely consider metformin as well.
So, before I bring Jackson, if you cannot hear us, just type the question, Jasmine. But you're frequently mentioning is now I realize it you know being a woman is harder, much harder than studying quantum physics. That I studied quantum physics. I tell you, I'm keeping track of all this thing. My head is spinning. One of the things that I have is you're frequently mentioning the BMI is a very significant biomarker there. What is that? But BMI does it with the woman. Uh, from
Great question. So, sorry, I didn't explain. BMI is the body mass index, and it's your height and your weight and corrected for your height. Because if you're taller, then you can have more weight because there's more bones and more body to cover. But it's a proxy for metabolism, and there are some drugs that vary by your BMI and some drugs that do not. And we're seeing that a lot of birth control pills vary by it. And again, it's because everything is based on a standard patient. And it's not a 70-kilo white male, certainly for birth control, maybe a 60 or 55-kilo woman. I don't know what it is. But when you wander, 2 or 3 standard deviations from what was tested on, then you're going to expect that it's not going to work as well. However, the IUD, the implant, and the vaginal ring are all fine, regardless of your BMI. But a pill you take by mouth has digestion and dispersion, and that's probably why it's affected. And they've actually tested doubling up Plan B, and originally they thought it would improve its performance, and it improves it a little bit, but not as good as if you didn't have that higher BMI. So it's insufficient to double up on Plan B.
Thank you. Jasmine, can you hear us, or if you cannot hear, type the question if you have any questions there. But
Yes,
I
I
don't
can
know.
hear you. Can you hear
Yeah.
me?
Okay, we can hear
Yes.
you. Go ahead.
And we can see you too.
And now
We
you
can
can
see.
see me. So thank you so much, Dr. Sophia, for taking your opportunity to speak with us today. I think that you did a very thorough presentation with making the parallels because when I was in college, I suffered from PCOS. So, like the first question with the lady talking about the PCOS, I was like, okay, that was going to be my question. And when I was in college, okay, so I was away from home, and insurance is kind of weird when you're a college student. So I would just like go to the ER because I would have these severe, real
Oh.
periods. So I'm racking up bills at the ER because you're literally sitting there. But a lot of times, what I got was, oh, you need to eat. I mean, eat healthy. You need to lose weight. Try all of these birth control. It wasn't like a concrete thing. And so once I got out of college and then I kind of came home and was able to speak with other women, I was like, okay, well, the standard idea of what it should look like or what a person should look like didn't match what I was hearing. So, like, I would meet quote unquote skinny women and they would have PCOS, or I would meet really heavy women and it was like, okay, wait, so
Yeah.
what is happening here? So I think when you do the two parallels between the different cultures, that really makes a lot of sense because we have these parallels and we're making these connections, but it varies. And I think the question about the BMO really matters because it particularly matters on each person individually. So I think that the beginning of your presentation kind of helped me to understand, like, personally, how, because I was kind of confused as to, okay, when I went to the doctor I got this one thing, but when I was kind of on the field and doing customer journey maps, I was able to communicate with different people and they didn't actually match the same. So I think you did a very good job with explaining the differences between body types and how it's really severe and how it takes so much of a long time off your life and things like that. So thank you so much.
Yeah, no, thank you for bringing that up. And just, a little more on polycystic ovarian syndrome. If you Google Pandia Health PCOS, we have a whole bunch of information. And on the top of it is a talk that I gave for Stanford on how to manage it. And so definitely they found that if people lose 10% of their current weight, be they skinny or extra or whatever, sometimes the PCOS will go away. And PCOS is defined by not having periods for 3 months in a row, and then extra man hormone, either by blood test or by symptoms of hairiness, zits, and retreating hairline or something like that.
Mhm.
So definitely check that out. But know that my experience is that if you use metformin and birth control pill patching or some progesterone is a better result than either one alone. And sometimes the joke is if you go to OB-GYN, the answer is birth control pills. If you go to an endocrinologist, the answer is metformin. And if you go to
Mhm.
a primary care doctor, we bring it together and we're like, oh, what happens when you put the two together? And it's like, oh, even better. So definitely 10% of PCOS women are skinny, 90% are on the heavier side. And I think if all of us go too far on our weight, then we are at risk for insulin problems, which then results in PCOS.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That, Dr. Ian, I heard talk about the Dr. David Sinclair from Harvard talking about if you take a metformin just it reverses the aging process. That's what he claims. Is it what is this connection between this reversing the aging process and in the preventing this health that
I am a
prevention?
believer in drugs, if you haven't figured that out. And so, amongst the let's see how long we could possibly live community, a lot of people are taking metformin. And the reason why is because one of our greatest morbidities is if we're overweight or if we're in a hyperinsulinemic state. And so, one way to tell if you're in a hyperinsulinemic state, particularly I do weight clinic at Stanford, if you look at somebody's neckline, particularly Asians, Latinos, and Blacks, not so much Caucasians, and it might be lighter in different ethnicities. If you see kind of a dark shading here, or if it gets bad enough, I've seen it on the knuckles, I've seen it under the breasts, I've seen it in the armpits, but often at the neck, that's a sign of hyperinsulinemia. So the metformin normalizes your insulin and therefore has been used to prevent diabetes, and therefore you'll live longer. Because if you've got a ton of sugar running through your body, you get diabetes, sugar gets and ruins your kidneys, ruins your eyes, ruins your nerves, all the bad stuff of diabetes. So that's where the metformin hack comes in for longevity, but it also works for PCOS. It also works mildly in our obesity patients, and it also works for people who have a family history of diabetes, because I think it prevents you from gaining the weight to get to diabetes, and that's how it prevents diabetes. And then the main bad things you have to look out for on metformin is if you have kidney problems, metformin affects your kidney, so you can't take metformin if you have kidney problems. But mainly I deal with people under the age of 35 in our weight clinic because I'm with the teen and young adults there. And so the main risk is an adult alcoholic. So if you're not an adult and an alcoholic, not so much a concern. It does have some GI side effects, but if you're trying to lose weight, a little fartiness or diarrhea or nausea isn't a bad thing if it's tolerable for you. But the side effects don't happen to everyone, but those are the side effects that happen.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ian. What is such a brilliant talk, really. This is as a man that I learned so much. We need to know. I have a daughter, I have sisters, and all these people. They should know what's going on. I mean, it is a very informative. Thank you so much. I'm going to talk about a story. I'm going to present a story about a 17th century woman. Her name is Emilie de Chatelet. She actually, yeah, this is a story so relevant to the Dr. Sophia Ann's talk, is about what she went through at the age of 42. She got pregnant at that time, 1700, 1800, 1702. 1749, she died. Think about that. She could not get any other alternatives, and she died. She produced one of the best works in science and mathematics. That's what I'm going to talk about. What she did, how she died. She wrote a first. She is one of the few people that at that time Newton was alive. She started understanding calculus at that time. She is one of the few who understood calculus during this time. Now we have, even now, there are a lot of people who have problems with the calculus. But now, at that time, when Newton was alive, very, very few understood the calculus, and she was one of them. And she wrote a children's math book, and she was a mother of four. She was a little, outgoing woman, but she got into a lot of. She got pregnant at the age of 42, and then after giving a birth, she died. And I'm going to talk about her story a little bit briefly for a few minutes. If you want to stay there, and if you have any questions, you're more than welcome to Dr. Ian and Jasmine. Let me show the things that I'm doing now. Yeah, what a wonderful talk, really informative. So her name is, who is this woman? Nobody knows. A lot of scientists, mathematicians, or physicists don't know about this woman. Her name is Gabriella Emilie du Chatelet. She confronted Newton and gave clues to Einstein. The Newton was a king of the physics, king of sciences at the time, and he was alive. and she confronted he was wrong. She said that something he did something wrong in physics, and then she gave the clues to Albert Einstein. What a woman she was! In she was so she was Emilie de Chatelet. She is a beauty and brains, a genius of enlightenment. She was uh, I have a T-shirts. I made it, for every chapter that I do, I make a T-shirts and coffee cups and pillow covers. And you can. I'm going to send one complimentary to Dr. Yan. Anyway, this is the T-shirt and a coffee cup, whichever she selects. I will send it. But let me. This one I am trying to close this. Yeah. So, Enlightenment Age of Reason, 1637. This is to 1850, reason of over superstition. There's a lot of superstitions during this time. This is a period called Enlightenment period, Age of Reason. Reason over superstition, tolerance over hate, scientific endeavor over beliefs. These are all a big shift in the human civilization took place between 1637 and 1815. So then Gabriella is 70. She was born in 1702 and she died at 1749 at the age of very 47 of 47 she died. So she was the Enlightenment period. Johannes Kepler and Rene Descartes, and but Johannes Kepler did the planetary motions, the laws of the planetary motions, and the Rene Descartes did a he combined the algebra. You can represent the shapes, geometrical shapes with the algebraic equations. Baruch Spinoza is one of the universal. He was kind of a proponent of the universal spirituality, and is a great. He was the is a he was Albert Einstein's favorite philosopher. In fact, Baruch Spinoza, and then Immanuel Kant is a modern day CXO, user experience guy. Everything you need to experience, that is in terms of philosophy. That is only empirical, and experience is more precedence over even empirical formulas. He says. So I would call him as the first user experience father of the user experiences, CXO. Then Isaac Newton is a legendary, and he put the laws of the Newtonian laws, the rackets going up or down, or the cars moving today because of Isaac Newton. And the Leibniz is a contemporary of Newton, and he did a lot of calculus, and he was one of those people had a long rivalry with the Newton. And Benjamin Franklin is a polymath of the United States. He invented the bifocals and the other. He was a constitutional. He drafted the first constitution. Adam Smith is a free enterprise. He promoted the free. And this is the time of the Enlightenment period. She was born only in the sea of men. There's the only woman. She was the woman who wants to learn math and science, Emilie de Chatelet. So she was born into a wealthy family, rich family, and then she has a love for math and science. She got tutored. She cannot even attend the math and science schools, so she has to take a home class, home study. She did, and her father was teaching her math and science, and she created a lot of love for math and science. So what she did was she did she did she is from aristocratic family. So she built a city outside of Paris. She built a huge place, and she built a library with comparable to the Paris library compared to the French library, with all the books and everything. She imported the equipment from England, and she wanted to test the laws of Newton. Uh, One of the things, she had a suspicion that laws of Newton may be wrong certain area. So one of the laws in the beginning days, there's the infancy stage of the energy and motion. That was the thing. So she built this big beautiful place. Think about 1700s that's doing this. So what is the problem is this is a kinetic problem is the energy of a moving bodies, that is a very infancy stage. The equations are Newton first proposal was the energy of a moving body the energy it produces while it's moving, it stopped at some place. It is a the is proportional to the speed. Its speed is velocity. That's what he thought in the beginning days, is a vis a viva, they call living force. And that's what it's proportional to v, velocity, speed. The energy that moving body produces is proportional to the directly proportional to the velocity of speed. But in fact, that is a problem. you know in fact, if you have a crash, people, if you have a this is what she found, is that from the Leibniz, what Chatelet found out, it is squared, not the is proportional to velocity, is proportional to squared velocity. It's a car going with a 20 kilometers per hour. If you hit somebody, that energy produces not directly proportional to 20. It is actually 20 squared, 400 times impact, that is. So the squared concept, she introduced the concept of squared, very fundamental, very important concept in physics. She introduced this on Emilie de Chatelet. And that square, that is a impact energy that produces, is also always squared. That's the reason. If you see why atom bomb is so, Albert Einstein took that clue from her. Now, finally, there was a strong justification for considering mv square as a fruitful definition of energy there. Mc square, 20 kilometers per hour, is the way it produces. But this velocity speed of light is 186,000 miles per hour per second. To think about that, the amount of the energy it produces. So if the asteroid hits the Earth with a speed, you see the destruction. You just half a mile radius asteroid can destroy the entire Earth with that speed. The kinetic energy translated into squared speed. Squared speed. The atomic bomb, for example, is E is equal to mc square. C is a 186,000 miles per second. Think about that. The energy it produces is a way above because of the speed squared. That is the power of the atom bomb. So the Emilie de Chatelet, she is stood between the two giants of science, Newton and Albert Einstein, and she confronted Newton, and then she gave the clues to the Albert Einstein's equation. She is really a woman. She is a mother. She's a scientist. She's a philosopher. She was writing the final chapters in the. She translated Principia Mathematica from Newton to all the way to the French. That's what she did. And, so she actually wrote a small the children's mathematics book. She didn't like the books that is written for children. She wrote a book for children, math book. So she had 4 children, but unfortunately she got pregnant. She was a little promiscuous, and that's one of the problem at that time in France. You can stay with the two, a husband and a lover. She is living with the same. The Manazatoire came from there, and she was living with the husband and a lover. That was a But she had an affair with somebody else, and she got pregnant. But she was writing until the last day of her life. She was writing this, translating the Newton Principia translation to French. That is still a standard textbook even today. The relationship between the distance and the time and the speed. So they said that a forgotten woman of science, because of the religious people, there were Talibans at the time, during those times, different kind of Talibans. A great man whose only fault was being a woman. That's what they said about her. And they could not accept her as, as she was almost eliminated from the history books. Woman who contributed so much in math and science. If she would have lived a little longer, she would have produced amazing work. And at that time, we didn't have a passionate voice like Sophia Yan, and she didn't have the contraception ideas, and she didn't get the contraceptives at the time. So unfortunately, she died at the age of so on September 3rd, 1749, she gave a birth. After immediate birth, after 1 week, she died. She wrote the last pages of the Principia, Newton's book, and that is unwavering passion for science and medicine. Science for her is a really inspiration to all women. It is, given the situations in the 1700s, is that she was used to dress as a man to get into the scientific institutions. So a woman now inspiration. People like Sophia Yan and everybody are inspirations to women, and we need people like them more and more. Thank you for listening, and I appreciate it. And thank you all. And if uh, if uh, if you're there and anything, if you have comments, please be sure. And I think that is a good. Thank you, Dr. Safiyan. It's a wonderful talk. Really, we want you to come back. Thank you, Jasmine. You did you told your problems and explained to the entire audience. Thank you all. Good
Thank
night.
you. Have a
Thank
good one.
you, Ramana. Thank you, Jasmine.